You can now follow me on all my social media platforms to find out who my latest guest will be. And don't forget to click the subscribe button and the notifications button so you're notified for when my next podcast goes live.
There was a point in time in the course of my incarceration when I was extremely violent. I've been involved in many knife fights. I've been shot many times. He said, "Young Mike," he says, "you're either with us or you're against us." And I said, "Well, then I'm against you." And he said, "Well, all right, young Mike, then you go ahead and you go on in and you make yourself a knife and I'll meet you out here in the morning." And that was my introduction to the 3-inch cockroaches at Old Folsom. You know, I was in a strip cell and it only had a hole in the floor. That's all I had. And the cockroaches would come up through that hole in the floor and they would come up my body and I couldn't lift my arms. So they would come up and eat the food off my face. And being confronted with that, I just simply named them. I have no appreciation whatsoever for violence. But the fact of the matter is I'm very good at it. I was shot 5 times once with a shotgun. And that was, the gunner was only 8 feet off the floor. He was up in a tower just above the fence. And so all he did was lean over the tower, and it's what I refer to as point blank range. So I took 5 rounds in the back. And the doctor told me if I didn't have the mass on me of muscle, that it would have penetrated my heart and my lungs. But I took the knife away from him. And when I put him down, he begged for his life. So I choked up on the knife and I tattooed a series of wounds around his heart to remind him that I'd given him his life. That's a process. And then, of course, I was engaged in combat with the enemy. At this time, it was the Black Panthers and Black Guerrilla Family and the Western Familia and the Texas Syndicate. And an ally was the Mexican Mafia and the Hells Angels. And, of course, I've observed numerous knife fights and killings, both at the hands of prisoners and guards. He sent 2 shooters up there. They went in through the side door. They shot Gary, who was on the couch. They went into the bedroom. They took Margot's 2 6-year-old twin daughters. They laid them on the bed, wrapped their arms around their teddy bears. They held Margot, and then they shot the little girls in the head while they made her watch, and then they shot her in the head.
Boom, we're on. And today's guest, we've got Michael Thompson. First of all, Michael, I just want to say thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure, James.
Very fascinating story, Michael. You've just spent over 45 years in prison for a double murder that you've always says you were innocent with, and you just got released last year. While you were in prison, you one of the leading members of the Aryan Brotherhood.
Yes.
One of the biggest gangs in America. Unbelievable story. I've watched a few of your documentaries. You seem a very humble, you seem a very cool man as well, but obviously not a man to be messed with back in the day. But like I say, first of all, just want to say thanks for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
I always go back to the start with my guest, Michael, where you grew up and how it all began.
Well, I grew up on and off the reservation, Big Pine Reservation. It was in... It's at the base of Mount Whitney. It's on the eastern side of the High Sierras here in California. And then when I was 12 years old, I went to live with my elder, he who walks on top of the wind. I just called him Walks on Top. He had an Arabian horse ranch, ran Black Angus cattle. And I spent, I guess, 6-7 years with him. And not too long after that, found myself charged with 2 counts of murder and went through the trial, was convicted, and ended up in prison, started at Chino. That's California Institution for Men, Chino, California. And it was a rude awakening.
How old were you, Michael? How old were you?
I was 20. I just turned 22.
And what was your life like before that? Did you go to school?
Yeah, I went to school. The problem was that I couldn't read or write. The school on the reservation, you just showed up for roll call, and then you left. But I'm dyslexic, and not much was known about dyslexia back then. So I played sports, and sports kind of carried me through. I managed, as a result of playing sports, to get D's in most of my classes, but then I got an A in physical education class, and then an A in wood shop, and the things that didn't really require me to study, or for that matter, think. And so I graduated high school, and but my life was working with horses, and rode the rodeo circuit. I was a bull rider, and herding cattle. So everything that goes typically along with ranch life. You have your spring roundup so that you care for your cattle and dehorn them, castrate them, give them their shots, and call those that are going to go to market. But my joy, I suppose, was working with the horses. I've always loved horses, and particularly Arabians. I do have a bias there. And so in addition to riding horses and taking care of the ranch, riding the rodeo circuit, that was about it up until the time. Matter of fact, I had just come off the rodeo circuit prior to being arrested. So, and getting involved in this entire case. So I think within 90 days, something like that. Didn't take too long.
So your life kind of turned upside down. Were you living life before that, Michael? Were you violent? Were you in prison before? Were you causing trouble?
No, I'd never been in trouble, never been arrested. And I mean, when you ride the rodeo circuit, you get in fights. Usually when you best, in my case, I was a youngster, so if I had bested the older bull riders in the bull ring, that night we would camp around the rodeo ring. Usually there's an olive grove that surrounds the rodeo rings, and we'd camp out there. And more times than not, the older cowboys would get liquored up and come looking for me because I'd bested them in the bull ride. So you had those type of altercations where you squared up, and you would fight, but it wasn't anything like fighting in prison. I was fortunate in that my older walks on top had taught me martial arts over the 6 years that I was with him, and so that helped me a lot. And I was a big kid, let's see, when I was 12 years old, I was already over 6 feet and weighed 220, and by the time I was 18. I was 6'4" and weighed 280. So you couple that with the inability to fight and the core strength that comes from doing ranch work, and you can be a force to be reckoned with.
What was family life like? Did you have a big family, Michael?
No, I have a large family, but my mother wasn't able to take care of all the kids. That's how I ended up on the reservation. And then ultimately with my elder, I was placed with him actually through foster care in California. And that was a blessing. I mean, imagine for a 12-year-old boy to be settled, housed with a rancher, hundreds of acres up in the mountains, Cleveland National Forest, working with horses, working with cattle, everything that comes with ranch life, fishing, hunting. So it was a blessing.
Nature.
Yes.
So a kid, 12 years old, dyslexic, feels as if he's abandoned. That was working with the horses, nature. Was that your getaway, Michael? Was that your freedom? Where you felt alive?
It was. Well, yeah, my elder taught me my ways. We call it the Red Road. So I was raised native. And so we would go to gatherings and we'd attend sweat lodges and ceremonies, and I would dance and sing and participate in the gatherings. And so we traveled really all over doing just that, and would travel by horseback sometimes from the ranch down into Mexico to the villages, and we'd have ceremony down there. So my life was pretty much consumed with my spirituality, um, horses, cattle, fishing, hunting, as you say, nature.
Yeah, that's where I believe life is at. And I see your dream catchers in the back there and your feathers. That my house is full of dream catchers and feathers, and I love nature. That I love the natives' the beliefs as well. That how hard was it being a native though in the 60s and 70s in America? Was a lot of things calmed down then, or was there still a lot of violence against the natives?
Yeah, there was. I mean, you have to remember that, well, I'll just give you by way of example, James, that when I went to prison, it was against the law to practice our ways. So we weren't even allowed to speak our language, because if they couldn't understand your language, they didn't know what you were saying, so they wouldn't allow you to speak it. But more than that, you had the three dominant religions, um, Christianity and Islam and Judaism. And other than that, no other religions were really recognized. So to practice my ways in prison was actually forbidden. But I was blessed in that the first job that I had in prison was for the chaplain. And he was a Protestant chaplain. And we had an agreement that if I took care of the chapels, he would allow me to use the garden to practice my ways. And I did. So I was able to go out there and dance and sing and commune, if you will, with nature to the extent that you can behind the iron gates. It can be difficult. Years later, with the passage in 1978 of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, we were allowed to bring sweat lodges behind the iron gates and did. So we built sweat lodges and we would conduct sweats and ceremonies. And so we were able to participate in our way of life, even behind the iron gates. And that made a huge difference in my incarceration. But
Before we get into the deep stuff, Michael, like, I know
Yeah.
the natives are, because I'm very intrigued by the natives' beliefs. That why is the ego so important to the natives?
Well, it depends. You'll see an eagle fan over my shoulder here, and then there's eagle feathers that are beaded hanging from the eagle portrait that I have there. That particular painting took first place here in California in 1991-92. It's called American Majesty. And but the eagle has different meanings for different nations, but the common thread that runs through that is vision. And you see that in nature. You see the eagle has extraordinary vision. It can see a fish in the water a mile up and then come down and take that fish. The American eagle is a fisher eagle, so it primarily fishes. But it's the vision. It is said among some of the nations, for instance, that the eagle carries our prayers under its wing to great mystery. And, there's, like I said, it depends on the nation that you're talking about, but typically it has to do with vision. You'll find some people that will take the eagle as a totem, but we use it in the context of a grandfather. And the feathers that you see behind me are part of my regalia. So I not only dance with them, but I smudge with them. And it's a cleansing ceremony. And so the grandfather eagle serves us in that capacity. And there are a multitude of reasons that various nations have for using the eagle as a totem. I should perhaps clarify that, when we pray as natives, we don't pray to the eagle, for instance. We pray to great mystery. And oftentimes the eagle is our guide in that. So that, as I said, when I smudge myself, when I smoke the pipe and I send my prayers, oftentimes I'll call upon the eagle to carry those prayers under its wing to great mystery. And, but it's primarily the visionary aspects associated with the eagle itself.
What's in the pipe, Michael?
Well, it depends. If you're using the long pipe, which is the people's pipe, then you have ceremony. You have typically 7 different ceremonies associated with that. So I had the privilege of holding the people's pipe behind the iron gates for 25 years and conducted hundreds of ceremonies with it. But it depends on the ceremony that you're conducting. So if you're doing a healing ceremony, for instance, then you would take your medicines, which are herbs, but first and foremost amongst them would be tobacco. Tobacco is our first medicine. So we use tobacco as a gift from Great Mystery and the Mother as our first medicine to call spirit and to send spirit. So you would take tobacco and you would mix that, say, with, oftentimes it's referred to as a kinnikinnick. So a kinnikinnick is a mixture of medicines for a specific ceremony. So that if I was doing a healing ceremony, then I would start with tobacco, then I might take deer tongue and sage and other medicines and mix those, and then I combine it. And then I load the pipe with a pipe loading song, and then have ceremony with that. And when you light the pipe, you light it from the coals of the spirit fire, and then you open the pipe with 4 breaths of smoke on the pipe stem, and then you begin your ceremony. And like I said, there are typically 7 different ceremonies associated with the people's pipe. Now, if you have a personal pipe, and I have a number of those also, you'll see one over my left shoulder. That's a personal pipe, and so I might use that just in personal ceremony. Oftentimes when I take my regalia out in the morning here, I have a lake that's just to the east of me and that I can see from here. And I'll do my morning ceremony, smudge myself off, load my pipe, say my prayers. And so it's used in a personal context there. Typically the people's pipe is used in ceremony for the people.
Yeah, obviously there's so many religions now, there's so many different beliefs, but what's the natives' beliefs, Michael? What's their true core beliefs in life?
Yeah, there's a commonality that runs between most native cultures, and their beliefs, vary, but they're nature-based. So what we find is we have, of course, reverence for Great Mystery. There are many names for it. Wankantanka amongst the Lakota, Gatichi Manitou amongst the Anishinaabe. But it all translates to Great Spirit or Great Mystery. And, I typically use Great Mystery in reference to mine, but we use a relationship to all of nature. So the tree people, we don't refer to trees as just trees, but they're people. We refer to rock people as that. The 4-leggeds, the winged ones, the finned ones. I'm Water Clan, so we believe that everything comes from the water, and that everything has a voice is, I suppose, one of the key characteristics, that by saying that everything has a voice, that, as my elder used to tell me, that if you open your heart to the spirit of whatever that is, it will speak to you. And so it's about relationship. So I have a relationship with the tree people. I live here amongst the great redwoods, and they, of course, have a voice, and they communicate with each other. And so it's understanding that intimacy that exists in nature and the opportunity that I have as a human being, a 2-legged, to have a relationship with all my relations. So amongst the Lakota, again, it would be Ahomatakiase. That would mean essentially that you're giving thanks to Great Mystery, and I wish to live amongst all my relations, all my relatives. So it would be one aspect. With the Anishinaabe, it would be different. It would be in their language a prayer to Waebunung, which is a spirit that dwells in the east, and one that we rely upon heavily towards guiding us. Mugwe Janini would be another one. But we have names and creation stories for all the things that I'm talking about. It depends on what nation that we're making reference to and what they're using. The Sweat Lodge, for instance, with the Lakota, has 30 different aspects. There's a cosmology associated with that. Now, I won't get too deep into that because that's something that all nations hold dear to themselves and privately. So typically to discuss these things, it requires permission, but I can speak about them in generalities without going too deep into the creation stories themselves or the significance to the people. But to answer your question, the significance of all native life is its relationship to great mystery, the Sky Father, which is the sun, and Grandmother Moon, relationship to the rest of the planets and the star people. It is the star people where we make our dream journeys to. For instance, when we put the bear to sleep, some nations don't do that, but most nations will put the bear to sleep in the fall. And so then when the great medicine bear makes its dream journey to the star people, we also have that opportunity to do the same thing. So it's
the reason why I'm trying to get so deep into this, Michael. Just I wonder what the connections are like going through life. Like you talk about the mystery of life, where you get 45 years, you say you're innocent. Like obviously we'll get deeper into the conversation, but I want to feel how you connected are to your native ways to then everything that happened in your life and how everything's connected and how you see it. Obviously your life changed at 22 years old when there was a double murder. You spent over 45 years in prison. Like, how did that happen?
What had happened was that two individuals, they were drug dealers, and they had a plan apparently to kidnap two little girls of one of the individuals that was running a drug cartel here in California. And so my wife at the time, her cousin, was working with him. And he had let me know one evening during a phone call that this kidnap was going to occur. And I told him that he needed to call the father and let the father of those children know that this was going to happen. He wouldn't do it. So I got the phone number and I called him and let him know. And that was really the extent of my participation in this whole affair, was letting this man know that his children were going to be kidnapped. But what happened was that subsequently, when these two individuals attempted to kidnap the girls, of course, the father was now aware, and both individuals were killed during their attempt to kidnap these little girls. And they were killed with their own weapons. Their weapons were taken away from them, and they were killed and they were buried. But like I said, that was the extent of my participation. When I went to trial, and they arrested me, my defense is that I knew nothing about this other than what I just told you, and that's of course what I told the jury. But there were other people, my co-defendants, that were testifying against me, saying that I concocted this plot about a kidnap plot, and the reason I did was to steal away with one of the victims' wives, and none of that was true. So my only resort at that point was to take polygraph tests. That's a lie detector test. So I did that. I took two of them. I took one from the FBI and I took one from the Department of Justice. I passed both, but they were not admissible in court. At any rate, I was convicted. The interesting thing about that, James, is that I'm now back in court and just received a ruling from the appellate court here in California, 4th District, that set aside one of those murder convictions. Well, let me clarify that. It's not set aside yet. I filed a petition. The court denied it. I appealed it. The appellate court granted it and sent me back to court. So now I'm back in court on the merits, and I have every reason to believe that one of the convictions will be set aside. Now we're having to go on to the California Supreme Court with the other conviction. But ultimately what I'm after here is exoneration. And I believe I will arrive at that exoneration at some point in the near future. It's taken a long time. It's been almost 50 years.
Yeah,
but
that's a long time. That's a lifetime for some people.
It is. But I was steadfast in my innocence at the time of trial and maintained my innocence the whole time that I was incarcerated. So I went to the Board of Parole hearings 18 times. The 19th time, they released me. But each one of those 18 times, they wanted me to admit to the crime, and I wouldn't do that. Not only because I was innocent, but on principle. So I probably could have been released had I admitted to the crime, but I just simply was not going to do that on principle.
Yeah.
I'm not going to admit to something that I didn't do. So, hopefully that's all being rectified now. But in the meantime, I was sent off to prison. And
what evidence? 45 years. Like, what evidence did they have against you, Michael? Was it a setup, or was it racism?
What they essentially had was the testimony of my co-defendants. They never said that I killed anybody, but they did. One of the co-defendants said that I did assault one of the victims, and that in that assault, under the felony murder rule here in California, based on his testimony and his testimony alone, saying that I was present and that I assaulted one of the victims, that by virtue of lying in wait to assault this individual, that based on what's called the felony murder rule, in other words, if you commit a felony, in this case an assault, and the person dies subsequently to that, then you're guilty of whatever that crime is, in this case murder. So the co-defendant admitted killing both victims, but because he said that I had assaulted one of them, then under the felony murder rule, I was convicted of both murders. Now, last year, the California legislature threw out the felony murder rule and revised it. And so that if you were just a aider and abetter, which was the case with me based on the assault, then whereas I was found guilty, now the new law says that you can't be found guilty. So that allowed me to go back into court and have these murder charges removed. And that's where I'm at right now with it. So it was just simply his testimony saying that I was present. And again, this was based on he and my other co-defendant, who was the father of these children, testifying that I concocted this kidnap plot. Well, when the co-defendant went before the board, he acknowledged that the two victims had approached him about the kidnap plot and wanted him to help them kidnap the children. Now, that was evidence that didn't come out in court, but he had to testify under oath before the board, so now we have that testimony. And that helps me, of course, because it's completely contrary to his original testimony.
Were you there, Michael, when the two boys get murdered?
No, I wasn't. Like I said, my only involvement in this was to call the father and tell him of this, what was going to be an attempt to kidnap his children. I felt that as a father, he had a right to know that. I didn't care about his business. I didn't care about him, actually. But I did care about the two children and the potential for them to be kidnapped for ransom. And so I made the call to him, and, I acknowledged that I did that. And if I had it to do over again, I would do the same thing. That is what was important to me, was that the father know that his children were going to be kidnapped. And like I said, when that attempt was made, the two individuals that were making the attempt were killed.
So at 22 years old, your whole life ahead of you, spiritual guy, love horses, live in nature, try to do the right thing and help save girls. It then backfires to be then doing life in prison. On the day of sentencing, Michael, did you know that you were going to get a guilty?
Well, I really didn't know anything. I was a fish. Like I said, I'd never been arrested, never been in trouble. And so I didn't, we referred to somebody that's new to the prison system as a fish. And I was definitely a fish. I didn't know anything about it. So there was a huge learning curve as it relates to that. But the biggest thing that I had to contend with almost immediately was the idea of being housed in a cage. I hold to this day that the the absolutely worst thing that you can do to a human being is put them in a cage. And that's what they did with me. They put me in a cage. Now, I'd been living in the mountains, running the mountains, and had no idea what it was like to be caged. But that was the only time in my life, James, that I ever contemplated suicide, because I was standing in a cell and I looked around me and I thought, I can't do this. I cannot do this. But there was a rock person that was protruding out from the side of the wall, high up on the cell wall. And I saw it, and I went up and I put my hand on it. And it's just like this rock that I wear around my neck, and that's why I wear this rock around my neck, just like that. And I went up and I put my hand on it, and it spoke to me. And all it said was, "It's going to be all right, little one." And that's all I needed. My spirituality was there for me. The spirit of the rock person spoke to me. And from then on, I was good. It didn't make it any easier to live in that cage, but I did have my spirituality. And even though I wasn't allowed to have my regalia, I would make things. I would save the, you have stone fruit, like peaches and nectarines and that. And so that if we got those, which was rare, but we did get them, I would save those in my cell, because that gave me a connection to nature. If we were given, for instance, grapefruit, you get a half a grapefruit. So I would take the pith out of that grapefruit half, and I would put it up in the air vent, and I would dry it. And then I'd wait for another half to come, and I'd put that up in the vent and dry it. Then I'd wait for an apple. And when an apple would come, I would dry the seeds. Then I would take the lining out of my boxer shorts, and I would sew the two halves of the grapefruit together with the apple seeds inside. And I'd take paper and I'd burnish it, and I'd braid it around the sewed together grapefruit halves, and that was my rattle. So now I had a rattle. And in my culture, a rattle represents the first sound heard in the universe. So we use our rattles to call spirit and send spirit. So you'll see that, I'm surrounded by rattles here. I have a turtle rattle up here. I have a gourd rattle up over here. And I use those every day to call spirit. Well, I did the same thing with those grapefruit halves. So that allowed me to connect with nature, with my spirituality, even in the dungeon. And I spent a lot of time in the dungeon. So I always found a way. I would have mice come into my cell. So, those became my relatives. I would have scorpions and snakes and spiders, and those became my relatives. So, when I was in solitary confinement, and I spent many years in solitary confinement, I would connect with these relatives. And that made it easier for me. But, as I advanced in my pursuit of education, I eventually became a biologist. And I did so because of my spirituality. I thought that because of my spirituality, that biology, the study of life, would be a good field to enter. It didn't quite work out that way, because science is much different. But it allowed me to further my knowledge as it relates to my spirituality. And I did that, and continue to do that to this day. So while I had those things available to me, while I was pursuing my education and learning to read and learning to write, because I couldn't read or write when I went to prison, but eventually I taught myself how to read and write. Chaplain England, the chaplain I first worked for, he started me on the path to that. And he was the first one that realized that I was dyslexic. So he would bring me magazines and different things on fishing and hunting, horsemanship, things that I would identify with. And that helped me learn to comprehend what I was reading. And then later in Old Folsom, the Black Guerrilla family and the Black Panthers would read Mao's Little Red Book on the tier. And I would get a copy of it and I would follow along. So I improved my reading skills by doing things like that. Mm-hmm. But where I was going with that, in the idea that the worst thing that you can do with a human being is put him in a cage, is that when I became a biologist, I came across a piece on in zoology that dealt with what's called zoochosis. And zoochosis is when they capture a wild animal in nature and they bring it in and they put it in a cage, and the animal cannot stand it. So it either kills itself or it dies of natural causes from the stress of being caged. And so I use that by way of analogy to coin the term pencosis. So penitentiary and psychosis. So pencosis is when you take a human being and you put them in a cage. And I've seen many, many people perish, die, commit suicide, or just simply die as a result of being in a cage. And that is, I think, perhaps the greatest struggle that any prisoner anywhere in the world as a human being has with being in a cage, is surviving that. And what you have to do to maintain your sanity and your spirituality, if you have it, and your health, your physical health, because it breaks all those things down. You deteriorate, your mind deteriorates, your body deteriorates, and you perish.
Yeah, but the most important one, Mike, I'd imagine it kills your soul. But that's why it's so good to touch on your beliefs at the start, like your spirituality, because I wanted to know if you would maybe turned against your beliefs because you've just been sentenced to life for a double murder you never done. A lot of people would have turned their back on their beliefs, but you didn't. You kind of focused more on those beliefs and started to, that's what saved your life, basically.
Well, I agree with you, James. It is what saved my life, that connection. But I want to emphasize that in my pursuit of survival, that I compromised my spirituality by being so violent. There was a point in time in the course of my incarceration when I was extremely violent. I've been involved in many knife fights. I've been shot many times. There's been a lot of bloodletting, and in my culture, we call it having blood on your hands. So it even became an issue when the elders brought people's pipe to me. There was objection by many people because I had so much blood on my hands. But what they don't understand about a pipe holder in that context is that his responsibility is to serve the people. And in serving the people is to sue for peace whenever possible. But if that's not possible, then more times than not, he will lead into warfare. So he is a warrior in addition to being a pipe holder. But in my case, I compromised my spirituality by becoming involved with the Aryan Brotherhood, which was a prison gang and a faction of organized crime. And those things actually went contrary to my spirituality and the idea that my goal, my purpose in life is to serve my way of life and to help people. And being a member of the Aryan Brotherhood went totally contrary to that. So it was 4 or 5, 6 years into that I received a visit from a number of elders who were attending a gathering in the Pacific Northwest. And they simply told me, this is at San Quentin, they came in and they told me, you're serving 2 truths. You're serving 2 fires, and you cannot serve 2 fires. You must choose. And so I did. I chose my way of life and my spirituality. And there were a number of things that went along with that. There were things happening that I did not agree with, that were contrary to my belief system. And so I reached a point where I did have to choose. Was I going to condone the activities that I was involved in, the violence toward innocent people? Was I going to step back on the road, the good red road, and acknowledge my purpose in life? And I made that decision. And but you're absolutely correct in your thinking, James, about the idea that it was my spirituality that was my salvation. And it was my spirituality that brought me back to step back on the good red road and to reconnect with my humanity. because there was a number of years there when I was not a very good human being. I certainly wasn't an example to the younger men and women in my culture that would otherwise have looked up to a pipe holder or a lodge leader or somebody that professed to be spiritual. So,
what was your first day in prison like, Michael?
It was culture shock, I guess, is the best way to explain it. Because you're dealing with a subculture of society that has its own rules. And then, of course, you have the prison administration rules, but that's an entirely different thing. The ones that govern prison are those that are established. They called it the convict code. So that's the do's and don'ts of prison. And so you just kind of feel your way through. My first day in prison was kind of finding my way through the ins and outs of where you go. You're given a cell, you're assigned a cell. You go through a series of tests, psychological evaluations. You see a psych. They test your IQ. And then you're mingling, if you will, with other prisoners. So you kind of get a sense of your environment. You take that in, where your place might be in that environment. What kind of job can you get? Prison is about hustle. So everybody's got to hustle. And so you learn these things, and there's an enormous learning curve as it relates to that. But the key thing for me was to maintain my integrity, one as a man, as a human being, and to be my own man. And so that was my focus, because there's an onslaught of influences. That's from drugs to alcohol to gangs. I mean, it's just a multitude of different things as a youngster that you're looking at, and that you have choices to make. And so those choices determine your place, your standing within the environment in which you live. And that can be very stressful. It and can take a minute. It can take a minute.
How many gangs were in those prisons in the 70s, Michael? Did you get approached every day with different gangs, or was it just the Aryan Brotherhood straight away? What was the process?
No, at the reception center, you don't typically have gangs that are organized. You have a permanent work crew, and it isn't to say that there aren't gang members associated with that, but you have no recruitment process. So the reception center is just where you go through these battery of tests, and then you're shipped off to another prison like San Quentin or Folsom, Tracy, Soledad, and so on. And then that's where your gangs have standing. That's where they have their strongholds. So in Old Folsom and San Quentin, that was a stronghold for the Aryan Brotherhood and the Mexican Mafia. And then you had other groups like the Black Panthers, Black Guerrilla Family, Texas Syndicate, and Nuestra Familia. Nuestra Familia stronghold was in Tracy, and that's where I was sent to. So that's where the recruitment process begins. Now, I got into a wreck with the Nuestra Familia Tracy and ended up being shipped out as a result of my violence to Old Folsom. So when I arrived in Old Folsom, that's really what they call it, the big house. That's where the big boys are at. So all your leaders of those groups I just mentioned were there, in addition to Charlie Manson and his group, and Joe Romero and the Sudanese Liberation Army and other groups. So, and these were all men that were older than I was. I was the youngest person there. And so, again, that was an educative process. So the first group that attempted to recruit me, because they knew that I was raised Native, was the Black Panthers. And that was Hugo Yogi Pinel. He was their leader, and he attempted to recruit me, and I declined. So the next day we went head up in a knife fight, And he ended up losing the knife fight, but I ended up being shot. And so there was a succession of events, all violent, that followed that. Then the Aryan Brotherhood attempted to recruit me, and I declined them. Ultimately, at one point, 4 members of the Aryan Brotherhood who were also native approached me. And essentially what they told me was that they lived better in prison than they ever did on the res. And they knew I was an old res dog. And, the res I grew up on was tar paper shacks, dirt floors. They had a few 12-foot teardrop travel trailers. But, the time I spent on the res, I slept underneath a trailer. I never slept inside. And it was abject poverty. So when these 4 individuals with the Aryan Brotherhood, natives, told me that they lived better in prison than they ever did on the res, that resonated with me. I understood that. So they began to explain to me how they controlled their resources as members of the Aryan Brotherhood. And that's really what all the gangs were about back then, was controlling their resources. You had a population that ran from 3,000 to 6,000, depending on where you're talking about it, Old Folsom or San Quentin, and a lot of money available there by way of revenues for drug trafficking, alcohol, prostitution, loan sharking, commodities in general, jobs. The gangs controlled all the jobs, positions of those jobs, the pay numbers associated with those jobs, and so on. So that appealed to me. That's the reason I actually decided to join the Aryan Brotherhood.
Do you think you were maybe manipulated to join them as well at a young age?
Well, it's easy enough to say that. No man likes to think that he's vulnerable to manipulation, but certainly I was. And as I said, what these natives, 3 were Pit River and 1 was Maidu. And, it actually made sense to me. Logically, it made sense to me that if I was going to live in this kind of environment, then I wanted to control that environment. I didn't want to be controlled by it. So, I was persuaded, certainly. Manipulated, I don't think so. But yes, I was persuaded. And it just made good sense to me. Before I was 30, I stepped away from the brand. So it didn't take that long to realize that I was caught up in something that was certainly much bigger than I was. And that it was involved in activities that just absolutely went contrary to everything I believed. Yeah. As I said, as the old elders told me, I was living 2 truths, and I had to make a decision, and I did.
So say when you have a knife off, why was it not just a fight? Who comes up with the idea, okay, get a knife and then we'll meet you the next day? How was that possible? Why not just have a fight with your fists?
Fist fighting really isn't very effective in prison. And it typically isn't condoned, because if you're in a fist fight, usually when a fight occurs, they're going to lock down the prison. And if you're in a fight, then you're confined to quarters for 10 days, depending on if you were shot or stabbed, and your wounds are healed, and then they do a risk assessment. And what it does is it disrupts business. So fist fighting is not condoned. And knife fighting, on the other hand, is a matter of principle. In this case, when Yogi attempted to recruit me, he essentially expressed their communist manifesto, and I'm not going to embrace communism. I didn't really understand. I was too young and really too stupid to understand what communism was, but I knew that I was an American and that I wasn't going to embrace communism. So when I denied him, what he said to me was that he called me Young Mike. He said, "Young Mike," he says, "you're either with us or you're against us." And I said, "Well, then I'm against you." And he said, "Well, all right, Young Mike, then you go ahead and you go on in and you make yourself a knife, and I'll meet you out here in the morning." So it was a matter of face. In other words, you could not deny you're with them or you're against them. And that's the politic of gangs in prison. And so I did. I went in that night and I made a knife, and I came out the next morning and he had a knife, and we engaged in a knife fight, and we were being shot at the whole time. And ultimately, he ran when he started to lose, and I chased him. And he had 2 bodyguards that attempted to intercede, and I got into a knife fight with them. And during that with them, I was shot. I was shot in the back. And so that put me down. But it was the same way. I mean, you know, when I was approached to join the Aryan Brotherhood, same thing. I declined. And I didn't know that was unheard of. You didn't decline membership in the Aryan Brotherhood. There were many people who were trying to get in, and it was a very elite and exclusive organization. Very few people were members. And that was based on the requirements that they had to meet. Physical prowess, first and foremost, and the ability to control your environment by yourself. In other words, nobody else. That you could walk into any prison and take over that prison. And you had to have that capacity, physically, first and foremost, but also intellectually, to control your environment.
What was it like getting shot, Michael?
Well, it was interesting. It dropped me, of course, and it takes your wind. And in this case, I was shot with an M14, which is a 223 round, fairly hot round. It was developed during World War II as a sniper rifle. And the idea is that the round was so hot that it would pass through the victim that the sniper was shooting at. And the purpose is that when that victim would fall, others would come out to help him, and the sniper would have more victims. So in this case, when I was shot, the gunner was 50 feet up on a wall. And so the trajectory of the projectile was such that it came down in such a way that it struck me in the back and it lodged next to my spine instead of passing through me. Now, had it passed through me, it probably would have taken my guts with it, but it didn't. Apparently, the spin on it was such that it lodged next to my spine, and that's where it stayed, but it dropped me like a sack of potatoes and took my wind. And so I was taken to the hospital, and they probed it, and the doctor decided that because of where it was at next to my spine, to leave it. He wasn't going to do surgery, so he left it. But paralysis set in, and, you know, they put me in my cell for 10 days, and they would slide a food tray up underneath the door, and it would take me about an hour because of the paralysis to roll over, and I'd just stick my face in the tray and eat what I could. And then it'd take me about another hour to roll back over. And, you know, that was my introduction to the 3-inch cockroaches at Old Folsom. You know, I was in a strip cell, and it only had a hole in the floor. That's all I had. And the cockroaches would come up through that hole in the floor, and they would come up my body, and I couldn't lift my arms. So they would come up and eat the food off my face. And being confronted with that, I just simply named them. And so, you know, every time I ate, then they would come up and they would eat. And by then I knew them by name. So eventually I went back out to the yard, but I still couldn't. It was only 10 days later. I couldn't lift my arms, and I could only shuffle step. And I went back out to the yard, and 4 blacks took me to the ground and stabbed me. And I couldn't defend myself. And so then I had to recover from that also. So it was a succession of events that were all violent, and either I was being shot or stabbed in my altercations. And, you know, the blessing in that, the opportunity, if you will, as a bias in that was that I had been trained by my elder. And so that training prepared me for this level of violence. And I told David Gran with New Yorker magazine one time that, you know, because he was asking about the violence. And I told him that I deplore violence, and I do. I have no appreciation whatsoever for violence. But the fact of the matter is I'm very good at it. And so with that said, it was that actually was my salvation, my training. And so, you know, I maintain that training even to this day.
Yeah. How hard does that then, Michael, to be in prison for 2 murders that he didn't do, to then stabbing people, to then being shot. Like, was that when you had to just register in your mind that, okay, it's kill or be killed mentality?
Yes, it is a matter of survival. And it is kill or be killed. I never actually took life. I didn't have to. My skill set was sufficient enough that I could defeat my opponents without having to kill them. Unfortunately, I was shot a number of times. But, I survived that and lived through that. And the key to a knife fight in the joint is you keep moving. And because you're moving, it makes you a difficult target. So, you may take I was shot 5 times once with a shotgun. And that was, the gunner was only 8 feet off the floor. He was up in a tower just above the fence. And so all he did was lean over the tower. And it's what I refer to as point blank range. So I took 5 rounds in the back. And the doctor told me if I didn't have the mass on me of muscle, that it would have penetrated my heart and my lungs. But because of the mass I had, the shot, I still have hundreds of shot in me from that. But that was probably the most difficult time. Other than that, being shot it either passes through, it knocks you down. As long as it doesn't hit anything vital, they probe it. If they need to sew it up, they sew it up. They put a plug in it, and you heal. So I was never stabbed sufficiently to where it required anything. I've sutured myself up. I've set my own bones. I've broken bones, and you do most of that yourself. So again, those are things that my elder actually prepared me for. I grew up, I think, exposed to catastrophic events, fire, flood, dealing with animals, hunting, particularly when you hunt bear. So that when situations would occur that others would consider catastrophic, I developed a way to contend with those. And so when I went to prison, I had that experience with me, so that when confronted with a catastrophic event, I didn't panic. And I will say that the first time I went out to the yard and engaged in a knife fight, that everything happened very, very quick. It was hard to keep account of everything that was going on. But by the 4th time I went out, everything slowed down to almost slow motion. And that's because our brain has what's called a virtual reality. And it creates this virtual reality of the yard, what's in the yard. And so you no longer have to assess that in your brain because your brain's already done it. And so you acquire that by way of a skill set. And I won't say that it becomes easier. It doesn't. But it's less difficult to contend with. So you develop a new skill set as it relates to knife fighting and violence, avoid being shot, at least being shot in the head. As I've taken shots in the leg and other areas of the body, but I've never had a vital organ hit. So that's as a result of the method of fighting.
What's the difference from hunting a bear to then stabbing a bear or stabbing a human? Do you find it the same, or is it totally different when you become so immune to it? Like you say, life or death. Did you feel it the same, or was
That's
it different?
That's a great question. Yeah, I actually use the analogy in my writings, the bear hunt itself. When I hunted bear with bow and arrow. And so typically, if you're hunting bear, the bear is one of the few animals, it and the tiger, that'll turn around and hunt you. And so when you're hunting a bear with bow and arrow, if that bear charges, and oftentimes they do, you have to take their shoulders out first. So that means that while the bear's charging you, you have to knock your arrow and fire and hit the bear in the shoulder and incapacitate that shoulder. And usually it takes both shoulders. And then you take a vital. So, and then you can go up with your knife afterwards and you can cut its throat. So, for those who have been charged by a bear know how that feels, you have to stand your ground. So you have to stay calm under that kind of pressure. When you're dealing with a human being and you're in a knife fight, that's a matter of skill with that knife and knowing what you're doing with it. I'd been taught not only how to make knives, but how to use it. And so I had that skill set. But there's nothing, I take no satisfaction in stabbing another person. I've done so on a number of occasions. In some of my knife fights, particularly the older knife fights, where you actually had the opportunity to engage in what's called long-term combat, you can bleed your opponent as opposed to stabbing your opponent. So if you bleed your opponent, then they grow weak, and you typically have them. So then the choice is then yours to take their life or not take their life. I always chose not to take their life. I never saw any value in that. If he was defeated, he was defeated. Now, I received a lot of criticism for that because people would say I left him alive to come back and get me another day, but that never happened. I did have instances where an individual tried to stab me where I didn't have a knife, and essentially that was an attempt at assassination, but I took the knife away from him, and when I put him down, he begged for his life. So I choked up on the knife, and I tattooed a series of wounds around his heart to remind him that I had given him his life. But fortunately, as I say, I've never had to take life as a result of my skill set. And I'm grateful for that, actually. The violence, it does impact upon you. I'm not a sociopath. I'm not a psychopath. Even though I was trained to contend with violence, and even though I had a skill set that enabled me to defeat my opponents, violence still impacts upon you, and did me, and does to this day. As I tell these stories that I'm telling right now, I'm reliving those in my head. In order to tell the story, I have to see it in my head. It's not just something off the cuff. And so, even right now I'm telling you about my first bear hunt, and what occurs there, but also my first knife fight. I can see that very vividly. Where there's fear involved, and I've been engaged with individuals who have become quite fearful in the course of that fight, you can smell that fear. And, when I retell these stories, that scent comes to me. You can smell the blood, that copper scent blood. And that comes to me in telling these stories. So what it forms is a kind of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And my biggest problem in being released from prison was PTSD, sensory overload. It was just too much. After living in a cage for 45 years, and then they dropped me in the middle of Los Angeles. And it was too much.
You seem a very cool, collective character. Like you're so, like you say, it's very calculated from what I see to your moves. If you were a chess player, I believe you'd be checkmate on every single person because of the calculated mindset. But when you're getting asked to join gangs, a man like yourself who's 6'4", over 200 pounds, very strong, very powerful, like, why didn't you choose to fly solo, Michael?
Well, because I think you see the advantage in survival. You understand what you're dealing with. You take in, you assess, if you will, your environment, and you see who's in control. So you're not going to be able to do your own time. That's what they call it. In some capacity, you're going to have to serve the gangs in some way. Everybody does. This idea that I'm just going to do my own time doesn't work. So you realize that. So my thinking is that I'm not going to serve the gang by doing my own time. So if I become a member of the gang, then I'm going to take control. And I'm going to control my environment, and I'm going to control the gang. And I did that within a year. I became a leader within a year. And and that came about organically. I mean, I don't mean to make this sound like that was calculated on my part. I was actually too young to have that kind of mindset. But I was properly schooled in how to assess my situation, to know my terrain, to know my enemy, to infiltrate that. You see, it's a Sun Tzuian characteristic to infiltrate your enemy.
The art
And
of
then
war.
that's right. Yeah. So, I mean, and my elder was an advocate of that type of philosophy. And we want to remember that philosophy is really nothing more than the human condition, not human nature. So, the human condition was what I was learning about, and it was a huge learning curve. And so I had decisions to make and choices to make, and I made them. And many of those decisions and choices were wrong. And but even in that, people say, well, do you regret it? No, I don't, because I did what I thought I needed to do at the time to survive. Now, as I evolved in my humanity and in my perspectives as it relates to the environment I was in, I realized that it was not for me and that I couldn't condone it. And so I stepped away. But in doing that, I also had to assume responsibility for that which I had helped build by way of infrastructure in my leadership role. So again, that was another decision I had to make, another choice I had to make. And I made that choice.
What was the decision? When was the decision to join the Aryan Brotherhood?
It was in 77, 78. And and then I stepped away in 83. So you got a good 4 or 5 years there where I was heavily involved and serving as a leader and involved in a lot of activities that had to do with controlling my environment.
How many people were in the Aryan Brotherhood in the 70s, Michael?
Well, you didn't have more than a dozen at the time. Like I said, it was a very small organization. It could have reached as many as 20 at one time. But, by comparison to the other gangs who had hundreds, like I said, the format for membership in the brand was not only your physical prowess, but your ability to control your environment on your own, by yourself.
What does it take to get in the Aryan Brotherhood?
Well, I've heard a lot of talk about blood in, blood out. I never experienced that. I was engaged in knife fights and a lot of blood and a lot of violence prior to even being asked to join. So there was no stipulation or otherwise or requirement on my part, nor did I ever require it of anyone else. One of the first things I did in developing the infrastructure of the Aryan Brotherhood was to do away with this idea that you put a knife in the hand of an individual that it doesn't have that skill set. You're setting him up for failure. So what was more important to me was to understand and discern what that person's talents were. So he might be good at dealing drugs. He might be good at prostitution. He might be good clerking, whatever it might be, moving commodities, whatever it might be, running a still, working the kitchen, foodstuffs. And so then you, as an associate, you cultivate that. So the idea was to cultivate associates that weren't actual members. And that required creating a buffer system, almost a cadre system, if you will, and providing an infrastructure. And that's one of the things that I did, was providing infrastructure. So I never required of anybody. Well, all the time that I was a member, there was only one person that ever came up for a vote for membership, and I declined. I wouldn't let him in. I didn't think he was worthy. Simply stated. He brought nothing other than a reasonable intelligence, but a whole lot of bravado. And bravado doesn't get you there. And arrogance. And I don't think that a warrior needs to be arrogant. I don't think that's a requirement of a skill set. I think a warrior is a human being. And as such, in my teaching is that a warrior's place is to protect and to provide. And so that if you're in a homeland setting, then it's to protect your family. It's to protect your community. That's a warrior's role. But if you arrogantly think that it's about violence and all that, and you're a bag of chips and you dominate people and you're domineering and you hurt people unnecessarily, and this is what I saw in this person. And so I refused to let him in.
What was it like then when when it started building the Aryan Brotherhood? Is that the first time you felt you had a family, Michael?
No, the first time I felt I had a family was with my elder. And, you know, I had an incident when I was a young boy. I was beaten by native men, and they hurt me pretty bad. And I was able to get away from them. And I ran off into the wilderness, really. And I climbed up on these rocks, mostly for my own safety, because they were liquored up. And I think I thought that they wouldn't be able to climb the rocks. But at any rate, I was up on these rocks, and I was a very young boy. And I had, I guess, what most folks would refer to as an epiphany or a revelation. But what happened is that I was looking through the trees, and the huge, magnificent trees, and I had all these rock people around me, and it occurred to me that just as I was aware of my environment, it was aware of me. That was the mother. That was nature. And I heard the wind in the trees. I heard the tree people. I heard the rock people. And I realized I had a family. And that was my relationship to the mother. And that's actually where my family ties, my relationships began as a young boy. And my love for nature continued. And so I was never very sociable. I mean, only because I didn't have the opportunity. I mean, I lived on a ranch up in the mountains. So, you know, when I went to rodeos, I would interact with other bull riders and the like. But, you know, I never drank. I never used drugs. I never saw the need. So, you know, I didn't date in high school because I had chores to do. You know, I had horses to look after. And so, you know, becoming a member of the Aryan Brotherhood, I think, like any gang, for any person joining any gang, it does become a family. And the gangs actually use that. The leadership will encourage that to manipulate youngsters to join the gang. But the key thing to that is the reason they do that is to make them expendable, to use them. And that's what they do, bar none. Every gang does it. They bring in individuals, they're considered expendables, they're used, and then they're discarded. And I know a lot of individuals that I've worked with over the years since I stepped away who were subject to that. And it's very, very traumatic because they believed that they'd finally found a family. You know, they grew up without a family, or they grew up without a father. They grew up, you know, in the hood or the barrio, and didn't have a family. And so the gang to them represented for the first time in their life that family. And that's what motivated them to join. And to their dismay, complete dismay, they were discarded, and it crushed them and traumatized them. And so it's one of the reasons I started the group that I Live, Learn, and Prosper. It's a nonprofit that I started in prison with my wife. And we started it specifically for individuals who had dropped out of gangs to help them cope with the very thing that I'm talking about right now, the post-traumatic stress disorder associated with being an expendable of that gang, of having been violated, having their humanity literally violated. And I still do that work to this day. And it's important So part of what I do is to educate. And I do that by coming on shows like yours and talking about these things openly. About, because James, you asked a great question. Did it feel like the first time I was a part of a family? In my particular case, no. But for the most part, yes, that is the case.
Yeah.
I guess I'm the exception there.
See, when you're hurting people, Michael, and how much did you use your spirituality as I wouldn't say as an excuse, but we can use that to try and justify the bad shit that we do, like a caged animal, and feeling as if what you were doing at that time was worthwhile. Like it's kill or be killed mentality. But how much did you use your spirituality as to justify what you were doing? Because like you says earlier, you can't do both. You can't be spiritual but yet hurt another human, but you've still got to defend yourself. And
I don't believe that you can, James. I don't believe that you can, and I don't think that I did. That's where I made reference to the fact that I actually stepped off the red road, and realized that I had, particularly when the elders came to see me and told me that I was serving two fires. So I wasn't using my spirituality to justify my violence or my activities. In fact, I had let my spirituality wane as a result. And that was the terrible thing about it, is realizing that I had done that. When the elders brought me the people's pipe, it was with a pipe bag, a medicine bag, a huge bag. It's a medicine bundle is what it's called. And it was absolutely gorgeous. It was, 3.5 feet long and a good 18 inches across, and it had eagle feathers and bear medicine and elk medicine. And my goodness, it was just gorgeous. And the strap that was attached to it, it was like a 2-inch strap, was beaded. And in all beadwork, there's a story. So I had asked one of the elders to tell me the story of the beadwork when they presented me with this medicine bundle. And she said, well, you see those arrows there that are going up the strap towards grandfather's eye? And I said, yes. She said, that's your path. That's the good red road. I said, oh. And I saw these wavy lines next to it. And I said, well, what are the wavy lines, elder? She said, She said, that's life. You see, life takes us off the good red road because we're human beings. And that's what those wavy lines represent. The key is to understand that you stepped off the road and stepped back on those straight arrows towards great mystery. And so I never forgot that experience, with that. And so stepping back on the good red road provided me with an opportunity to be a servant again. And I didn't get caught up in those things that I had done by way of justification or rationalization. There is no justification. There is no rationalization. It simply is a matter of survival. And that's what I thought I was engaged in. And I still believe that. Could I have done things differently? Of course I could have. What that would have been, who knows? That's a hindsight characteristic. But in the moment, you have a choice to make, and you make that choice and you go with it and you live with it as best you can. In my particular case, I was confronted with circumstances that made me reevaluate what I was doing and how I was doing it. And I did that. And then I made another choice, and that was to step away, because it was not in keeping with who I believed myself to be.
What was the daily routine like? Was it everyday survival mode, Michael?
Yes.
Especially in the Aryan Brotherhood, was every day a hit out in your life, or was there some days you felt safe, or was every day on edge?
No, it's survival is such that there is no rest from it. None. There are many of those that use drugs, and that was their escape. They would get loaded or they would get drunk. I never did. My escape was education, was books. I wanted to educate myself, and I wanted to learn to read, and I wanted to learn to write, and I did. And once I did that, I put myself through college. And I started that even while I was a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. But I had an organization to run also. I had to go out and work out every day. Back then, I was lifting a lot of iron, and I would teach others how to fight. Those who read would read philosophies like Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Nietzsche, Beyond Good and Evil. The other side of that is Thus Spake Zarathustra, Machiavelli, Karl von Clausewitz, and then a dialogue would result as a result of that reading by way of what people got out of that. And the idea was not to mirror what you were reading, but to make it your own. So, years later, I understood that to be self-efficacy. And I did that as a result of my association with a brilliant man named Albert Bandura, who developed the theory of self-efficacy through a social philosophy is really what it is. But at any rate, my everyday activities were engaged in advancing the structure of the Aryan Brotherhood and those who were members and those who were associates. So through relationship, through training, through education, and through deeds, actually, following through with things that needed to be done, making those decisions, command decisions, developing countermeasures to law enforcement's approach to the gangs, counterintelligence, if you will. So I developed that and developed smuggling weapons into the prison as opposed to cutting knives out of steel that was already in the prison. I learned as a result of physics how to beat metal detectors. And so once I learned how to beat metal detectors, then I had a group of individuals on the street smuggle knives into the prison. So I was using buck knives, folding buck knives that when you unfold them are almost 9 inches long and very, very sharp. I smuggled, they didn't have cell phones back then, but I smuggled CB radios in. So I was in contact with all my members that lived in different buildings within the prison. Through CB radio. I smuggled in guns. So that's a process. And then, of course, I was engaged in combat with the enemy. At this time, it was the Black Panthers and Black Guerrilla Family and the Nuestra Familia and the Texas Syndicate. And an ally was the Mexican Mafia and the Hells Angels. And so it was a matter of interacting with those groups, creating the infrastructure for the Aryan Brotherhood itself, and how that fit with the other groups, the development of resources, mastering those resources, the effective utilization of those resources, like a business. And so that was my daily routine.
So obviously when you've got rivals, but then you're making a business, you're smuggling guns, you're smuggling drugs. Was there ever, could nobody get the heads of all the rival gangs, make a peace while everybody can still make money? Or was it everybody trying to be the head of the prison and try to take control of the drugs and the money?
Yeah, that actually did occur. It was at Old Folsom, and we had paired off with the Black Panthers and Black Guerrilla Family numerous times. And it was actually by agreement because of the way the place was set up. So they would go down to the lower end of the yard and we would amass at the upper end of the yard. And then upon an agreed time, we would merge. And so one of these times where we were merging as groups to fight, I noticed that there were guards up on the second tier looking out the window taking betting on as people paired off with their knives. They were taking book on them. And I stopped everybody. I just yelled. I stopped everybody. Everybody stopped. And I said, look, we're their entertainment. So we need to stop this right now. And let's come together. And we did. We stopped it. We came together. We called a truce. And we started talking about, how we might improve our environment and how we might facilitate that improvement. In other words, what we needed to do in cooperation with each other as opposed to competing. And cooperation is very, very difficult in prison. It's difficult to get cooperation amongst groups, even within your own group. It can be difficult to get cooperation. But cooperation amongst the guards and so on. And oftentimes that's, of necessity, extremely manipulative. I've been referred to as a master manipulator. And in that context, I am. Like everything else in my life, I've turned that around. I've taken all the skills that I acquired as a leader of the Aryan Brotherhood and applied them to legitimate practices because they're the same. You see, the difference here is that you're doing legitimate work. You're doing it without infringing upon anybody else's rights. Even with a nonprofit, I'm attempting to persuade people to volunteer, to help. But you see, I'm not infringing upon anybody's rights. And that makes the difference.
Plus, you get a clean heart with it as well.
There's truth in that, James. Well said.
Thank you, brother. So how much drugs were you smuggling in each weke?
I tell the story about how the FBI, once I stepped away, told me that they estimated that in Old Folsom alone in 1978, that the Aryan Brotherhood took $3.5 million in drugs out. Let me get this thing off the... So that'll give you an idea. I mean, it's very lucrative. The problem was at that time was that the vast majority of the members were drug users, drug addicts. And so the vast majority of any revenues that were being generated as a result of the sale of drugs was going into the arms of the members and their associates. So that's not good business. So the idea is to stop the drug use and to use those resources towards essentially what came down to was organized crime activities. And the group, the faction of organized crime that I think we most emulated was the Italian mafia and what they'd done with their organization by way of infrastructure. And so that was the goal.
Yeah, the mafia are very well run. That's why they've run America for many years. It's unbelievable that the way the five families have operated. When you talk about the skill set and it's just masterminding some things, how they've still, I don't know how big they are now. I interviewed Michael Francese not so long ago, and he was pulling in like £8 to £10 million a week.
Yeah.
Unbelievable what the mindset can do and where you can take it with the right skills. When did the Aryan Brotherhood then become, because obviously you get the Nazi signs and the 666, was that in the 70s as well, or was that later on?
No, the swastikas didn't occur until later on. You had the shamrock, which I have on my ring finger right there. But the 666 was an application by some members, and it was to represent really the Antichrist in the sense that anti-establishment. So, the story goes that St. Patrick taught the trilogy in Ireland using the shamrock. So the 666 was a shout out contrarily to that anti-establishment. So, but the swastika didn't come until years later. Many of my battles in the beginning were with neo-Nazis. I'm not a fan, never have been. Don't like anything that they stand for. I'm quite familiar with Hitler and his organization, and I refer to Hitler as the original jawjacker. His use of methamphetamine and his stormtroopers' use of methamphetamine, explains a lot of the atrocities that they committed because methamphetamine affects the brain, literally. It's not just an addiction, but I have no regard whatsoever for that group or those which have followed contemporarily.
Yeah. So see, at the height of it in the 5 years, how many stabbings do you think you've done, Michael?
Well, I was involved in 22 knife fights. That I know because I was shot 22 times.
You get shot every time?
Every time. In one case, I was shot 5 times in the same fight. But not every knife fight was documented. So I was in other knife fights that weren't documented. But a lot of violence, an extraordinary amount of violence. But that's what gives you your reputation and your standing within the prison environment. And of course, I've observed numerous knife fights and killings, both at the hands of prisoners and guards.
What was it like to see your first killing in prison, Michael?
I think about these things, James, and what I realized that I did toward my own survival was that I engaged in what's called stoicism. I stuffed it. You don't allow yourself, I did not allow myself to be impacted by what I was observing. It's brutal. It's gory. It's inhumane. And even though I may have known that at the time, I did not allow myself to think about that. I simply stuffed it. And that stoicism stayed with me for many years. Because it was really, even at those times when I suffered beatings at the hands of guards, I did not allow myself to engage during or after the fact. I just simply stuffed it. And, it has long-term consequences because, again, in you just asking the question, my mind has a reel that it plays of everything that I've seen. It's like, people talk about their life flashing before them. Yeah. Well, that happens. And so you see that. So now as I sit here, I'm required to explain to you my sense of stoicism and how I stuffed it and didn't deal with it at the time. But as I'm sitting here right now, I have to deal with it. And it's gruesome. It hurts.
Yeah.
There's nothing else like it. People say, well, he talks about these things very calmly, which does not explain what's going on inside and what you don't allow others to see. And so the value in having this discussion is that it does give me an opportunity to talk about the brutality, the inhumanity associated with it, the impact that it has upon my sensibilities as a human being. And it's extreme. It makes me question my humanity. And my goal in life right now is to be the best human being I can possibly be. So to manifest these images as a result of this discussion or my writings or otherwise requires on my part that I process that. And so I engage in that. I engage in therapy.
This is therapy. This is therapy for both of us.
Bet. Yeah,
even though it's dark, I ask a lot of personal and deep questions, but understand it's to try and get a release and for people to understand that you're not shying away from the questions, Michael, and that's why I know you're a strong character. But like you say, you relive that pain every day. No matter how much you can educate yourself or be spiritual, the pain is there until the day we die. Like I've lost so many family members and friends to murder, suicide, overdose. I've been an addict myself, Michael. I've been in prison. Like, I've done a lot of bad in life. I'm 4 years clean on that path. And when you talk about...
Congratulations. No, it's huge, man.
Yeah, when you talk about the lines and stuff, I understand that. That was just a ripple. But I'm back on that red road, like what you say, or the path. Like, and I'm trying to do good and get a deeper understanding of human beings, because I believe we're all sensitive. No matter if you're top boy in the Aryan Brotherhood, like, you still feel pain. Just because you've been shot over 20 times, like, you talking about that and reliving the past will still bring back all the emotions, like any other kid standing in the corner or working in McDonald's. Like, we all feel, we're all human, we're all connected, no matter the skin colour, no matter the job, no matter the income. We're all fucking connected, man. And that's the mad thing about life, is right now I feel as if a lot of people are disconnected because we all see the world differently, divided, religion, race, power, money, income, whatever it is.
Oh, the hatred, brother. The hatred. You know, that's the biggest thing right now. And how do you contend with that? Well, you contend with it through love. You see, and I take that position, and we'll take that position for the rest of my life, because that's really what you're talking about. The only way that you're going to heal and help others heal is through love. It's real simple. We don't talk about it enough. We talk about a whole lot of hate, but we very rarely talk about the solution to that. You know, why people hate. You know, there's a piece on my website, The Haters Need to Hate. You know, and it goes to the heart of this. But what it really comes down to is the capacity with each and every one of us as a human being. You see, to call upon our nature, not the human condition. The human condition is what gets us in the way, but our human nature. And that's the capacity that was given to us. It's an innate capacity for each and every one of us, you know, to tap into that, regardless of what we've been through. You know, there's a saying, my wife tells me it all the time, that once you've heard someone's story, you can't help but love them. The key to that is your heart open to that. And that's the real issue here. You see, you know, my ego strength is intact. I'm not concerned about that. See, what I am concerned about is my humanity and how I might use the rest of my years on this earth, you see, to facilitate the very thing that you were talking about, to understand that we all hurt, that we all feel pain, that we're all human, regardless of skin color, ethnicity, it doesn't matter. We're all human beings. And that's what's so important here. You see, and for people to be able to talk about their pain is also important. You know, the atrocities that occur behind the iron gates from caging human beings are absolutely terrible. And we need more discussion about that, what a person goes through, what they have to do to prepare to come out. I mean, can you imagine what it's like being 45 years in a cage and then coming out into this?
Nah.
Most people can't, and I couldn't. See, I thought I was prepared, but I wasn't. I wasn't. You see, that was arrogance on my part. I not only hurt myself, but I hurt my wife. You see, that which is most dear to me. And so the idea behind doing the things that I'm doing and you're doing is to educate people. Is to ask them to open their heart to the spirit of what we're talking about. And just think about it. Just consider it. And if you have a story to tell, please tell it. Find a way. Write it. Do a podcast. Do a blog. Come online. Go to a website. I mean, in this day of technology, there are a multitude of ways in which you can do that. The key is to feel safe in doing it, you see, because most people don't feel safe. Those people that have been traumatized. And you'll find that the vast majority of people that have served time behind the iron gate have been traumatized. And so that if we can figure out a way to deal with that trauma while they're still incarcerated, while they're doing their time, so that when they are released, they're not repeating that pattern. And that's critical. Absolutely critical.
Yeah.
So we approach that in a fourfold way. When I say we, I'm talking about Live, Learn, and Prosper. We approach it in a fourfold way. Bio, psycho, social, spiritual. Now, spiritual is my foundation for everything. Everything, including my marriage. You see? But I have to take a look at the biological. What's going on with me physiologically? Am I taking care of myself? Am I healthy? You see? Sociologically, am I socially interacting? You see, do I have a life? Psychologically, What is my mental state? What is the state of that mental state? And how do I arrive? How do I discern whether I'm healthy or not? I mean, James, there are a number of things that we have available to us as human beings, as families, as communities, as a society, as a global community, if you will. I got a call from a policymaker in the Netherlands who works at The Hague. And he wanted my advice on the jihad unit that they're running there. And I was only too happy to be able to weigh in with what I thought. And the issue was, would the elders there influence the youngsters that if they put them in the same unit? Well, my goodness, of course they would. You would think that would be a foregone conclusion. But there are a number of factors that come into effect there. And so it's looking at those things. It's generating a dialogue, creating a dialogue. That's the very thing you do by this podcast. You generate a dialogue. You ferret out the anxiety, the stress, the story, the love, all of it. And what it allows the viewer to do is to holistically take that in and determine if it has value for them. And perhaps even to emulate something that they see. That's what self-efficacy is. That's self-mastery, is to take that in, monitor it, see if it fits you, and then evolve from there.
How hard was it for you, Michael, to be in for a double murder that you said you never done, to then people maybe believing you at the start, to then becoming the most violent men in prison, to then being one of the leaders of the Aryan Brotherhood, where then nobody would be thinking you ever told the truth about the two murders at the start.
Right.
How hard was that?
Well, I think it's a natural thing that people are going to be suspicious of that, because they want to understand, particularly when I'm asked questions and I don't give the answers that they want. How could you look at that? How could you do this? How could you do that? And not have an impact upon you? What they're doing is they're relying upon their own experiences. See, and those experiences are limited. That's why it's so important to talk about these things, because you can't imagine what it's like to live behind the iron gates, to be in this type of situation. So that when you're faced with a decision like, how could you be engaged in that kind of violence? The simple answer is to say, well, you weren't there. You see, and essentially you have to be there.
Yeah.
You see, is really what it comes down to. People want to confine what they're hearing within the structure of their own experience. And that experience usually is limited. So what they do is they dismiss it, or they say you're lying, or you're this, or you're that. And that's their prerogative. It's not a judgment on my part. What that requires of me is to find a way to better express myself, to explain myself. You see that, where that empathy is there, where that compassion is there, to bring that out. Where that pain and that suffering and that affront to my own humanity as a result of the things that I did comes to the surface, is to express that. In other words, what it is, James, is allowing people to see you. And most people aren't willing to do that. You see, but it takes courage.
Nobody wants to show vulnerability. Yeah, nobody wants to show vulnerability, Michael. A lot of people in the world are scared and they're vulnerable, and that's the sad thing about it. Like, we don't want people to see through us, because having that vulnerability, then a lot of people see as a weakness when actually it's a strength.
That's
right. When you're in prison, Michael, then you're the leader of the Aryan Brotherhood. You've got power, you've got control, you've got money, you've got people who would kill for you. How hard was the decision then to leave it and then put your own life in jeopardy?
Well, it wasn't difficult to leave it. I mean, it was, people ask me about that all the time. How difficult was the choice? It wasn't a difficult choice. Once I knew what I was looking at, and I knew that was contrary to who I was as a human being and the way that I was raised, it was a very easy choice. What followed, I never could have anticipated. by way of more violence and corruption and just an entirely different, by way of example, the scenarios are so extreme by way of being opposite, but similar nonetheless, that my time with the Aryan Brotherhood is the first 10 chapters of my book. My growing up, time in the Aryan Brotherhood, and that's 10 chapters. That's part one. Part two is once I stepped away, working with law enforcement, testifying in court, threats on my life, snipers on the roof, bombs on the transportation car. I mean, it's just corrupt administration. That's an entirely different scenario. So, I'm really at odds here right now. I may just go ahead and publish the first 10 chapters and let that be out there because that says one thing. And then continue working on the second 10 chapters and put that out there because it says something entirely different. We'll see.
What was the reason for leaving, Michael?
Well, it's those two truths. There was individuals that were going to be executed and were executed, as a matter of fact. Of course, there was a visit by the elders. That was huge, so far as telling me you can't serve two fires. And then there was the idea of, there was a case up in Oregon, and it was a Hell's Angel case. And it wasn't something that was condoned by Sonny Barger. I want to make that clear, because he was the leader of the Hell's Angels. He just recently passed over. Again, I'll say it, rest in peace. Sonny was a friend. And, but Margot Compton and her two 6-year-old twin daughters and her boyfriend were executed by two shooters. Now, Margot was a witness against Buck Garrett, who was the second in command of the Hells Angels at the time. She testified for the feds against him for pimping and pandering. He got 4 years. But when he found out where she was at, and he did, he sent two shooters up there. They went in through the side door. They shot Gary, who was on the couch. They went into the bedroom. They took Margot's two 6-year-old twin daughters. They laid them on the bed, wrapped their arms around their teddy bears. They held Margot, and then they shot the little girls in the head while they made her watch, and then they shot her in the head. I cannot ever, under any circumstances, see myself condoning that, being a part of that, being associated with anybody who would be a part of that. So that was one of the factors. And I went up and I testified against the Hells Angels in that case. And the courtroom was filled with Hells Angels. There was threats on my life and everything else. And I would do it again. Without hesitation. There was a situation where an individual was testifying against members of the Aryan Brotherhood. And so the subject was broached insofar as to kill this individual's wife and daughter, and then his parents. And it took everything I had in me to move them away from the wife and daughter and the mother, and it left the father. And I still bear the responsibility for that father having been assassinated because I didn't stop it. I stepped away from the brand, but I didn't stop it. You see, I had an opportunity to stop 2 guards from being killed in the federal prison by AB members. And so I went to law enforcement with that and told them that guards are going to be killed. And they laughed at me because the Aryan Brotherhood had never taken a violent position against guards before. But now that it shifted, it had changed. Just like perpetrating violence against innocent people had changed. And so with these changes staring me directly in the face, I had another choice to make. Was I going to be a part of this? And I was not, could not, would not. And so I made the decision to step away. But with that came a responsibility. I had helped build this group. This group that was now going to perpetrate violence against innocent people. So I had a responsibility to bring that group down. So I've done training films for law enforcement. I went on a lecture circuit, speaking strictly to law enforcement, to put them up on that game. You see, and it continues to this day. I'll still work with law enforcement toward their understanding of what they're dealing with. Whether it's drive-by shootings, people that shoot into a house where children are killed. Are you serious? That's a warrior? I don't think so.
How hard is that to live with that pain, Michael? Like, obviously, you can see you getting quite emotional with
you can't live
getting
with it.
killed. Like, how do you?
It's you cope. You cope.
You deal with it.
Yeah. The old Provo faction over there in Ireland. There was a time when I supported that by way of running guns and otherwise. But when they hooked up with the PLO and they started bombing civilians, then I removed myself from it. You see, man to man, I don't have a problem with that. If as men we're going out on the battlefield and we're going to do battle because we believe in some principle, whatever it may be, even if that's just controlling your resources, to this day, I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is when you victimize innocent people. And people call that collateral damage. I don't think so. It doesn't work like that. These are people who have no idea what the game is. If you're in the game, then you know what the rules are. So that if it comes to violence, you know why. But if you can't get to an individual for whatever reason, and you turn around and you blow up his house and destroy his family or kill his children or his wife, that's not a warrior. That's not a human being. Now, I know it happens all over the world. But in this context, I'm talking about gangs. And there needs to be a lot more discussion about it. I hear too much talk about, he's a snitch, he's a rat. That's the language the gangs develop so that it won't come back on them. They want to shame you so that you won't give up their game. I mean, my goodness, you can go back years where, maybe your parents told you don't be a tattletale. Well, I understand that in that context, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about victims. We're talking about innocent people. And that's important. Very, very important. And there needs to be a dialogue about it. What is it? They say, see something, say something. You see, in this day and age, that becomes critical. If you see something and it doesn't look right, say something.
How hard was that, Michael, then to then sit at court, give testimonies? Like, what was your life like then? Like, were you just in solitary confinement every day, or was there still hits out in your life? Like, how have you managed to survive?
There have been numerous attempts on my life. The last assassination attempt was in 2015.
Just before you were released?
Yeah, it's about 4 years before I was released. But I'd taken a vow of nonviolence many years before. And so, unfortunately, I was a clerk at the time, captain's clerk. And I was helping people with their work. And one guy was going to the board the next morning. So I just finished a double shift and he asked if I would help him with his paperwork. And I said, yeah, I would. So we sat down on a bench out in the day room and I let this guy get behind me. He was the Mexican mafia hitman. And I let him get behind me and I was tired. So I was not paying attention. And he did a roundhouse kick and took me over the back of the head over heels backwards. I went semi-unconscious. And he straddled me and grabbed me by the hair and he reached in, he had a box cutter and he was going to cut my throat. I couldn't see, but I could hear. So I heard his hand come by me. And as he reached in to cut my throat, I blocked it and he cut my ear in half. And a doctor fortunately developed a new technique and was able to sew my ear back on, which was nice. I like my ears. But he reached in again. He choked up on my hair. I still couldn't see. And he reached in again, and he went deeper. I guess he was going for the windpipe too. And but like I said, I could hear his movements and I could feel his body language through his hand on my hair. And so I blocked it again. This time he cut the back of my throat, and he missed my anterior artery by 1 millimeter. And so then he choked up again. This is being observed by staff. I mean, I recently read the write-up on the air, so people would understand that staff were observing this. And this third time, when he choked up and he reached in, I got my sight back. So I saw the weapon and I took the weapon away from him. And in truth, there was an opportunity to break his neck. And I ran that through my head. But I heard my wife's voice. And my native name is Sky, Old Man Sky. And she said, Sky, no. And I heard that. And so I just took the weapon and I put it up underneath me and I laid down on top of it and I waited for staff to arrive. Now, I was working with 600 other prisoners at the time in 15 different groups through my Live, Learn, and Prosper organization in the prison, that prison. And I'd been essentially preaching to them nonviolence. A lot of these were old dropout gang members, and I was telling them, you don't need to resort to violence. You know, communication, there's a number of ways depending on the situation. In this situation, once I took the weapon away, there was no need for violence, even though I could have used it against him. So because I took the actions that I did, this resonated through that entire community. It had an enormous positive impact. And I'm deeply grateful for that. The fact that I didn't resort to violence when I could have said something to them, that what I was attempting to explain to them was honest.
Yeah, because if you do, then Michael, then everything you say then is full of shit, basically, because then people, it just doesn't mean anything.
You have no credibility. You're just talking out the side of your neck. You're another jawjacker. You see? And so, you know, that was a pivotal point. It was a milestone in my life. Realizing that I could actually practice that. And that I had the wherewithal to know that the threat was over. So it had an enormous impact on the community, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
That was the last attempt. And that's just one example of a number of attempts over the years when I stepped away. You know, some of them while I was under escort by what they referred to as my handlers. You know, when I was going out to court and testifying. So, you know, that included bombs on the transportation car. It included snipers. In one case, I was held in a substation, and the guy had keistered a .25 automatic weapon. They found out where I was at, and he got picked up for drunk driving in the area, and they brought him into that substation. Well, his mission was to shoot me with this little .25 auto that he had keistered and in his rectum. And one of the officers that was part of my security team just didn't feel right. So he took a picture of this guy and brought it into me, and I recognized him. So they x-rayed him and found the .25 automatic. So it's just little things like that, you know, that you have to go through. I was subjected to beatings by the guards that it was called the Green Wall. And they were sharks. That was their name for themselves. And they thought that I was going to testify against other guards in a killing where they shot a man in the head and they murdered him. But they thought I was going to testify in that case. I didn't have to. I would have had they asked me, but at any rate, because they thought I was going out to court in Oregon at the time testifying against the Hells Angels. So they called me out of my cell and they chained me up. I had a lot of chains on me and cuffs. And so I thought I was going out to court. Well, in fact, I wasn't going out to court. They took me into a room and beat me to the point where for the first time in my life, I thought I was going to die. And the only thing that saved me was that I was choking on my own blood, and I was able to bring it up and spit it at him. And when I spit it at him, I told him, "That's all you got?" And it was bravado, of course, on my part, because I was just about done. And for whatever reason, that stopped him. But that was just one of a number of beatings that was administered to me by guards because I was testifying in cases in which they were involved. So, it was investigated by the Department of Justice, the FBI. There was a hearing before the Senate Select Committee, legislature in California. Like I said, that's the second half of the book because it's a different story.
Yeah. How many convictions did you get, Michael?
In the cases I've testified in?
Yeah.
Yeah, there have been convictions in every case except one. And like I said, I don't go into those with the idea that I'm a prosecution witness or that I'm seeking conviction. I simply go in and tell what I know, the truth. And what the jury does with that is their business. If they believe it or don't believe it, it is not my business. I simply, say what I know and let them decide for themselves. So in every case but one, there were convictions. And I think in the one case, it was just a matter of one convict testifying against another convict. And, I like I said, I don't get into the analysis. It's not my place.
See, all the stabbings you've done and the violence, like, did you never get any more time added on, Michael? Or was when you turned evidence that you get time reduced? Like, how did it work?
No. Yeah, I picked up other sentences as a result of stabbings. 3 that I can think of right now down in Chino. I got 7 years on each one of those. But no, I never received any favors or anything else. When I stepped away from the brand, I did an additional 35 years. I never allowed any of my cooperation with law enforcement to be discussed before the board or otherwise. I didn't do it for that reason. I did it because I believed it was the right thing to do. And, some people take issue with that. They can. I don't mind. Take issue with it. But, everything that I'm talking about and everything I've ever done is well documented. It's all a matter of public record. So, if I had received some kind of favor, it would be public record, believe me. And there'd be people screaming about it. But no, I didn't do it for that reason. I don't continue to cooperate with law enforcement insofar as educating them for anything. And, all my work with addicts and otherwise is pro bono. I don't charge. This is about helping people. This is about educating people. And if we can do that as a community, that's great. If we can do that as an individual, as we come together, however we do it, but it needs to be done. It needs to be talked about. Look at your own experiences. Look what you're doing as a result of that. That has extraordinary value. If you're anything like me, you wake up every morning grateful.
Yeah.
Because I do every morning.
Yeah, you've got to, man. Life's a beautiful thing. It's a journey, like you say, Michael, but it is a scary journey because sometimes I still question things that I'm doing, and sometimes I think about the past where it can bring you down a bit, but it doesn't stop me. I've got so many levels to go in this life to try and not just help myself, but help others around me by learning from my mistakes. I don't shy away, but I'm still learning because I still fuck up daily. I still make mistakes, but I don't.
You're human.
Yeah. So when you leave then, Michael, obviously you're 35 years again after it. Like, what was the worst day you ever had in prison?
Well, bar none, it always comes back to being in that cage. Like I said, I didn't receive any special treatment or get special housing or anything. I was still in a cage. And a lot of that cage time was in solitary confinement. Supposedly for my own safety. But eventually I was able to convince them to let me back out on the main line, and I went back out on the main line. And, I continued my education. I got my first doctorate in 1988. I got my second doctorate in 2000. And then I became a drug and alcohol counselor while I was still incarcerated. And went through their program and became certified. And then started working for the Department of Corrections as a alcohol and drug counselor. And I did that right up until the time I paroled. Plus, I started Live, Learn, and Prosper in 2014. And, that went on for 5 years and is still going on. There are a lot of people that, are trying to shut me up and close it down. Mostly gangs, corrupt law enforcement, the other side of what I'm trying to do, insofar as helping people. And so, that's the battle that we have, really, is, having to contend with that. But, I don't get caught up. People say, well, do you read the reviews? No, I don't. You got a lot of people hating on you. And I said, well, that's their problem. I'm sad for them. And like I said, haters need to hate. And that's a reality, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, one of the things I'm concerned about right now is domestic terrorism. I think it's huge. I think it's going somewhere, and I don't like where it's going. These kids that are being recruited into these organizations, they're expendable. And just like the jihadists, they're being sent into these areas and executing all these people. And for what? For what? Because somebody else is hating? These kids don't know what they're doing. They're being manipulated. The vast majority of them come from broken families. They're looking for family, like you pointed out a little earlier about prisons, prison gangs. The same thing now is happening on the streets. They're recruiting these kids. And they're using them to hurt other people, to facilitate their hate. Interestingly enough, they call them hate groups because of the type of crimes that they're committing. And they're atrocious crimes. And we need to generate a dialogue about that. What's happening with these kids? What might we do to turn them away from that? You see, I'm not against these groups. I'm for these kids and bringing them away from that, preventing them from even becoming involved in that. And how do you do that, James?
Speaking out.
You do it with love, man. You do it with love.
Mm-hmm.
That's all these kids want. That's why they join these organizations. They want to be loved. It's really that simple. Don't need to put a lot of ha-ha on it. They just want to be a part of something. They want to be loved. They want to be needed. Yeah. And as a global community, that's our responsibility.
It's tribalism. People just want to feel part of some sort of shit, no matter if it's good or bad in life. What was John Gotti like, Michael? I watched something about the Aryan Brotherhood where he needed protection, or
yeah, he was given protection by he was given protection. I mean, the whole idea there is like anything else: resources. Whether we were using Charlie Manson's resources or John Gotti's resources. There's an opportunity there with Gotti and the mob. It was about picking up contracts, a lot of money. The mob knows what it's doing. They're money makers. And so it was about picking up contracts and then providing protection to those individuals that were behind the iron gates, like Gotti. And it doesn't matter who you are on the street, in the joint, you're going to conform to the convict code, the structure. In other words, if the gang's running the joint, you're going to do what the gang says, no matter who you are on the street.
What was Charles Manson like?
Well, I just did a piece here recently on Charlie. And last thing I want to do is perpetuate the myth of Charlie Manson. But, I've referred to him in the past as a punk. He was a punk and a pedophile. And he was a two-bit crook that had the ability to con and manipulate younger girls and some guys. And he did that effectively. He used lysergic acid, LSD, to do that. He used the times, essentially, 60s, what was going on in this country by way of, the hippies and the dropout scene and against the Vietnam War and everything else. He used all that to his advantage. But he was an opportunist and was not very intelligent. I don't know why people ascribe intelligence to him. He had choreographed routines that he used and practiced for his interviews. You know, it was like he just took them off the shelf. He couldn't have a conversation, but he could choreograph these routines like a song. He was a songwriter. So he would choreograph these routines like a song. And then when the time came, he would run through that routine, and that's all he had to say other than making stupid faces. But, I tried to help him. I did ceremony with him. I tried to set up an organization for him that was environmentally sound, you see. But none of us should ever be stopped from attempting to try to help somebody, regardless of the circumstances. The choice as to whether or not they come to that of their own volition is their choice. There's nothing we can do about that. That's true even in addiction. I can talk until I'm blue in the face in trying to help somebody with addiction, but until they come to that of their own volition and realize that they have an addiction, nothing's going to happen. And that's the problem with addiction. It's a disease of the brain. It's not moral turpitude. We used to think that. We used to think that the brain wasn't plastic, but we now know that the brain is plastic and that we have the ability as human beings physiologically to manifest new dendrites in the brain, to create a new memory. It takes us away from that fragmented memory of trauma. Epigenetics, it's up and coming. It's going to be a huge field, and it needs to be a huge field toward our understanding of how the impact of the environment, the environment's impact upon our cellular regeneration at an epigenetic level. And it's huge.
I think that shows you your character though, Michael. Even though the crimes that some people have done, you're still willing to help them. Like, how did you manage to see the world that way? Especially the life that you led for a while. You had the pure life, the clean life, to then prison, to then changing again and getting back on that road. Like, how did you see people as human and not the scary things that they've done?
Greatest influence in my life is my wife. And what she did was she loved me unconditionally. But she's a taskmaster. I call her Dragon Lady because she takes me to issue. She does not let me get away with anything. It's like you said, on your day-to-day basis, you're a human being. So you're constantly getting caught up in this and caught up in that. And I do the same thing because I'm still not prepared to be out here. I'm still working on that. So much of this is new to me and overwhelms me. But this woman, Ariel Tomioka is her name, has loved me unconditionally and has guided me and directed me toward my understanding of myself. You see, what happens, James, when you are arrested at the age of 22 is that your emotional development is arrested. There is no more emotional development because everything is about survival, like the Stoicism I talked about. So you don't have the regular experiences that people have as they're growing older to learn how to discern and make decisions and to trust and so on. I had none of that. I went into a prison environment where it's one way and only one way. So my emotional intelligence was arrested. And so since I've been out in this very short time, I'm developing my emotional intelligence. And I'm doing that with the help of my wife, who is brilliant. She's a mitigation specialist. She works with death row prisoners and their families. She's been doing this for 20 years. But I also have a friend, Kevin, who is a therapist, but he's also a damn good friend, my best friend, you see. And he keeps it real with me. He talks to me. You see, we talk about PTSD. As a matter of fact, we're going to do a podcast together because we think the conversation that we're going to have might help somebody. And that's what this is about. So my intent here is to get my wife to continue writing. She's a brilliant writer, and she won't come on camera with me, but she will do a podcast with me. So I want to get her to start talking. Mm-hmm. Because just the same way that she's helped me, I know that she can help others.
How did you meet?
Well, like I said, she's a mitigation specialist that works with people who are facing the death penalty. So she had a client who was Aryan Brotherhood. And it was a RICO prosecution of a number of Aryan Brotherhood members, and it was a death penalty case. So she was hired to mitigate his circumstances relative to convincing the jury not to put him to death. So he sent her to see me to get me to recant everything I'd ever said about the Aryan Brotherhood. They were portraying the Aryan Brotherhood as just a social club, which is absurd, really, if you think about it. But that's what they were trying to tell members of a jury, that they were a social club. Now, if a jury doesn't know, I imagine they could think, well, no, maybe they are just a social club. Maybe they just sit around playing dominoes. But at any rate, she was sent to see me, so she came up to see me, and we met and started talking. We spent about 15 minutes dealing with the issue that I was not going to change my testimony or the intelligence that I had provided. So we set that aside and we just had a conversation as two human beings. And so for 10 years, we were just friends. And she'd come to visit me every weekend. And even when I was out in Susanville, she'd drive 10 miles one way, spend the weekend, visit me, and drive 10 hours, and drive 10 hours back. No matter where I was at, she came to visit me. So after 10 years, we realized that there was something more to our relationship than just a platonic friendship. So we got married. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And so we've been together coming up on 18 years. And, she was with me in prison through a lot of that madness. She stood by me. She fought for me. When administrators were trying to kill me and set me up, she stepped right into it and pointed them out. And we pulled her covers, really, is what she did. And so, she became public enemy number 2. I remained public enemy number 1, but she became public enemy number 2. And, we don't live together. We're not together. Can't be.
Why?
The threat. You see? So
how hard is that, Michael?
It's difficult. I use every opportunity I can to go be with her, and they allow me to do that. I'm still on parole, and I'm on probation. You see? So I have to ask permission to get a travel pass, and then I get travel down, and we spend time together, and then I come back here. So we're 500 miles apart.
What was your first day release like, Michael, after 45 years inside the cage?
It was actually pretty simple. I mean, they put me in a cage and give me my dress outs, and I dressed out, and they put me in a van, and they drove me over to a parking lot, train station, and they let me out of the van and said, "See ya." I said, "Okay." And out from behind the car walked my wife. You see, I've always been free in my mind, but now I'd been liberated. And I embraced my wife, of course. And then we went and had sushi. So, I had a friend come by, and he says, I'm WaterClan. So he says, "I know you want to go to the beach and pay your respects to the mother." And I said, "I do." He said, "Well, let me take you." Because I had to go into a 6-month program immediately for transitional housing. So I checked in with my parole officer, and then I had to check into this transitional housing, and then I had to get permission for him to take me down to the beach. So we drove down to the beach, and we couldn't get to the water. There were so many people. We could not get to the water. So we had to walk out on the pier. And, I wanted to touch the water, but I got to look at the ocean. I got to look at the mother. And I turned around on the pier, and I looked back towards the shore. My goodness, it looked like an ant colony. Just nothing but houses and people. And I said, "Okay, I've seen enough. Let's go." And so I went through that 6-month program, and tried to see my wife as much as possible as I could while I was in that program. Had to work while I was in the program. And you have to go through all their classes and everything also. And even though I taught those classes, I still had to go through But that was my immediate release. The first week I was out, 3 men were shot in the head just around the corner from where I was staying. Gangbangers, just drove right up and shot him in the head. And it wasn't that much later that a man was stabbed to death out in front of the house. So the violence was really no different than prison.
So what's your life like now, Michael? Is there still a hit out in your life? Is there still a price over it, or are you?
Yeah. There's still all that. I don't dwell on it. I live my life. You know, I this morning before we did this, I'm splitting up 20 rounds of wood, or 20 cords of wood, and I cut and stacked 4 cords this morning. Before we did this, you know, I work out every day. I've got an 18.5-foot canoe that I go out on the lake on. I engage with a dojo and a sensei in Aikido twice a week, and enjoy that. So it's just, you know, I do a lot of manual labor. I'm denied access to the internet right now, so I can't even go on my website to talk to people on my website. You know, I'm doing this today because I have a studio engineer like you do that has set this up. You know, he can have access to the internet, but I can't. So the court allows me to do this, but I can't access the internet otherwise. I can make calls and text, but I can't have any data. I can't go on the internet. And it makes life very difficult. So we're actually going into court on that because it's the Supreme Court in this country ruled that it's unconstitutional. So unfortunately, I'll have to fight for it. You know, people may be of the opinion that based on my cooperation with law enforcement that everything is just laid out for me. It's not. I'm still public enemy number 1 to a lot of law enforcement. They see me as a trophy, and if they can put me back in prison, they will. And that's what they're trying to do right now.
You seem you seem very in tune with the universe, Michael. You seem like very calm. You've got a great aura about you, even though the shit that you've been involved in and the shit that you've done. Like, I still see a good person and a good
Thank
energy.
you.
Like, what's your plans? I feel as if you maybe see the future, but what is your plans for the future?
Well, to be a servant, you know, simply put. It's my life purpose. It's my wife's life purpose, and we're going to do that together. We're going to continue working with Live, Learn, and Prosper. We're going to continue working with people. We're going to continue writing. I'm going to continue lecturing on the lecture tour. I've been asked to do a TED Talk, so I'll probably do that. And I'm going to start my own podcast. And I'm going to continue going on podcasts like yours. Just to interact with people such as yourself that have the experience, that know what I'm talking about, that can weigh in with their own experiences, and that are there to help, to enlighten, to educate. And you know, I admire you, and I'm grateful for you and what you're doing.
Likewise, brother. Just before we finish up, you don't seem a man who gets very emotional, but can I ask you a question? It's quite personal, but when was the last time you cried, Michael?
Oh, yesterday.
Yeah.
It's almost a daily occurrence. I was talking to Kevin, and then, you know, when I talk to my wife, and, you know, my wife makes me watch movies now, and I never watch TV. So now I watch TV and I watch movies, and I cry watching the movies and the TV, and she doesn't. And I said, "What's the matter with you? How can you not cry at this?" And she says, "You're just an old broad." I said, "Okay, I'll take that." Because I enjoy being human. And, but yeah, I'm deeply touched by a lot that's happening in our world. And, you know, when I hear these things happening, they do bring tears to me. And how can they not? Because I allow myself now to feel. You know, I no longer have to engage in that stoicism that I did in prison. And, you know, I regulate my emotions, but not to the point of stoicism. And I enjoy being human. It's a great, great feeling.
Why do you think you're still alive, Michael?
Well, because I think it has to do with my purpose. My purpose as a servant, to help others. As many times as I've been shot, many things that have happened to me over the years, and that I'm still here. That I was released from prison when I was never supposed to be released. No one thought I was ever going to get out because I wouldn't admit to crime. But that happened. You see, now I'm in court, maybe looking toward exoneration. Wow. You see, is time relative? Nah, who knows? I'm in my 70s. I got another 30 years ahead of me. I'll make it to 100 easy.
I think so.
Yeah. So, just think about it. I got 30 good years to do some good work, to enjoy life, to love and be loved, to nurture and be nurtured. It's amazing. I love my life. I do.
That's a beautiful thing, though, especially everything that you've been through in life. But you can't change lives if you're feeling fucking unhappy. Like, you've got to enjoy it to then help others. Like, your light then guides others out of darkness. A lot of people might not agree with what you've done, but a lot of people will agree with what you're doing now, which is a beautiful thing. And like you talk about the road and getting back on the road, everybody's on it and off it. It's called life, like you say. Like, I'm a big believer in spirit guides, and I believe you're very well connected and protected also. Like, look at the hits that you've had out in your life, and you're still here to tell the tale. You're clearly here for a reason. You have a purpose. You'll be changing life daily, and no doubt the lives that you're changing now helps with the pain of the past as well, because no matter how much we can educate on ourselves, on the brain, and energies and whatever it is, like, the pain's still there. The brain's a powerful thing. It absorbs everything, but it's trying to live in the present moment to then create your better future, which is difficult because there's so many distractions now with internet, TV, and probably that could be a good thing in your life right now that you've not got internet, because you can really get connected with it where it disconnects you from life, Michael, because there's so many distractions. Like, being in nature is where I feel alive. Being in the mountains or in hill walks, or I do a lot of cold water therapy here where I'm in the cold water, because it numbs. The screams up here don't seem as loud when I'm in nature. The voices are still there, the pain's still there, but I still push through them with doing the natural things in life. And it can be difficult because I'm trying to create one of the biggest podcasts in the world. I'm trying to create the biggest conversations that people have ever seen, and with that comes an enormous amount of pressure. But again, I just know it's the right purpose, because I won't falter. I sometimes I hit speed bumps, but I don't break. I've never broke. I've never bent over or laid down for anyone in life, Mike, when I fucking never will. I have morals. Maybe back in the day I didn't, but I was lost. I was confused. I took much drink and drugs to try and numb the pain, not realising it made the pain worse. But I'm on a great path now. I'm learning. I'm open to just learning from my own mistakes and try to love again, and try to... The main thing is as well is try to accept love, Michael, because it's scary. When you become vulnerable and become to someone to accept to love, you feel that you can get hurt, which is a fucking scary thing, because nobody wants to feel pain, and a woman's pain is harder than anything. All the shit you've been through, that you've been away from your wife, it's probably the hardest thing you'd ever have to deal with, even though you've dealt with so much shit.
It is, you're right. But what you're doing, it takes enormous courage. It really does. And I'll say it again, I so admire you for that. And the thing here is that I don't know what the future holds for you. I can see the path that you're on, and it's a good path. So I'd like you to bear one thing in mind as you continue down that path. You keep me in mind. And if you come across anything that you think that I can assist you with or help you with, or we can just have a conversation about, or if you just want to have a phone call. You hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, I appreciate that, brother.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it's about. It's about relationship.
And likewise, though.
Yeah, thank you. I will do that. I will do that.
Just before we finish up, like, where can people get a hold of your stuff, your website, books, whatever?
Yeah, we'll have the book coming out here in the next couple of months. Synchrony Press will release it. Ron Turner's the owner and operator of Synchrony Press, and he'll be coming out with. There may be other things happening also. There's some things in the works I don't know about completely about in the hands of other people is what I'm saying. So When that comes out, I'll let you know that the book's out, and maybe you can let your viewers know.
Yep.
But other than that, the website is livelearnandprosper.org. And I'm going to be putting up my own podcast. So at some point, I'll send you the link for that. I'd like to do this again.
Definitely. I feel as if a friendship will be getting started from today, moving forward, Michael. I got in contact with the Damage Done podcast I seen you on them, and I was blown away by your story. Like, it's unbelievable what you're trying to do in life. It takes an enormous amount of courage, especially having a hit out in your life. But again, with your visualization and your belief and that ego behind you as well, I believe you're connected to something, whether it's flying solo or seeing your prey from a distance. I believe you're very in tune with the universe. A lot of people might not understand this stuff, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
But for coming on today and telling your story, mate, it's been unbelievable. For anybody that's watching, Michael, that's maybe struggling, what advice would you have for them?
I guess the same advice my elder gave me, that everything has a voice, no matter what it is. And that if you'll just simply open your heart to the spirit of that voice, it will speak to you. And in your darkest moments, you see, the light in that is love. Love yourself, first and foremost. You see, that enables us to love others. And that's what relationship is about, is the ability and the capacity to love. It's the greatest gift we were ever given as human beings, is just that. It's at the root of life. And, if somebody needs help, I don't have access, like I said, to the internet, but if they think I can help them, get on my website and leave a message. And my great niece manages it for me. She'll get the message to me. And I won't be able to, go on the internet or anything like that, but I can call them, and I will. I'll call them. I'll engage on any level. Doesn't matter. Because that's what it's about.
Yeah, that's amazing, brother. Again, Michael, for coming on today and telling your story. It's been amazing. A lot of people get a lot of positives from this. You're a man that doesn't shy away from his past, and for being in prison for 45 years for something you never done, I'm glad you're getting some light shed on that and eventually getting the right verdict. But again, amazing story. I look forward to speaking to you and having many more conversations with you. Anything I can ever help with, I'm only a phone call away, brother. But again, thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you, and keep doing the right thing in life.
And you, brother. Take care.
Thank you, brother. Take care.